by the stewards of our common home, which is the committee of the Office of Life, Justice, and Peace. This time of the year, September, Christians around the world celebrate the season of creation. This year's theme is listening to the voice of creation. Next slide, Daniel. I want to begin with a brief prayer. Holy God of compassion, you are present in the whole creation and in the smallest of your creatures. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing and to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle to live more simply and to make the changes within our power for the common good. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Next slide. The stewards of our common home mission is specifically in response to Pope Francis's Laudato Si. We educate and motivate the Catholics of our diocese and all our neighbors of our moral responsibility to take immediate action to address what Pope Francis calls a social and environmental crisis. Next slide, please. This is the program you came for, The Earth on Your Plate. Why diet change is essential to save our planet. Before I introduce our presenter this evening, I'm going to ask you to complete 3 survey questions. It should only take a minute. Note that you have to pull the bar down for the 3rd question.
I'm having trouble.
Yes, someone's having trouble? Could you let me know what the problem is?
Elizabeth, you're on mute, it appears.
When we select one, the bar grows. I can see. I thought I'd selected all of them. So,
Yes, you have to pull that bar down on the right. So we see our responses right there. Could you show those again? Maybe they're gone. but at least we got oh, there we are, good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that response. Okay, and next slide, please. Our presenter this evening is Mohan Gurunathan. He is an engineer, an entrepreneur, an activist, and an expert on food sustainability. And he has a distinctive presence in the Bay Area. Before I ask Mohan to proceed with his talk this evening, I want to encourage you to enter questions in chat as Mohan is lecturing or speaking, because he will stop 2 or 3 times and respond to our questions. So Mohan, please, we're so happy to have you this evening.
Thank you, Marita. I am delighted to be here. Can everybody hear me? Maybe you can give me a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you all and for spending some time with me this evening. I'm really honored to be invited by the diocese and the stewards of our Common Home program. So I really hope you find the information I present to be worthwhile. And I am also available after the talk if you would like to get in touch with me for any questions you have or any follow-ups. So thank you again for the spending the evening or a little bit of your evening with me. And if I can, I would like to present my screen. Okay, great. Can everybody see my slides here? Okay, great, thank you. So Marita, thanks for your kind introduction. The title of my talk is The Earth on Your Plate, Why Diet Change is Essential to Save Our Planet. I'd like to start with a homage to Queen Elizabeth II, who, as you all know, recently passed. And she gave a really inspiring speech at the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow. And I wanted to just repeat an excerpt of her speech. She said, none of us will live forever, but we are doing this not for ourselves, but for our children and our children's children and those who will follow in their footsteps. And this captures for me the reason I do these talks and the reason I became an activist. And also the reason I think we all need to be activists, and we all need to change ourselves and work to change those around us, because while most of us will be able to live comfortable lives and have, adequate food and water, sorry about that. Most of us will have the opportunity to live comfortably and have adequate food and water and energy, but the same is not so certain for our children and for our children's children. And if we want to see them have a better future, we all have to change. We all have to act now. And so this really resonated with me. I wanted to share that with you. Now, as you probably know, we have made a mess of things on this earth. We have many destructive habits. And some of the ones that you hear most about are, of course, fossil fuels, mining, logging, plastic pollution, water pollution, among other things. Now, these are some of the big ones, and they are certainly problems we need to work on. But there's something missing from this list that gets far too little attention. And that is something we all partake in every day, and that has a profound influence on our planet, though it rarely gets mentioned in the media. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. Before we get to that, I want to share with you a study that was done by a Swedish environmental think tank called the Stockholm Resilience Institute. And they've come up with a concept called the Planetary Boundaries Study. And in this study, they've identified there's 9 distinct systems on Earth that are we responsible for keeping within certain limits to maintain the habitability of Earth for future generations. And the 9 systems that they've identified are the climate, biodiversity, deforestation, freshwater use, organic pollutants, ocean acidification, atmospheric pollution, the ozone layer, and man-made pollutants. These are 9 categories that are all currently under stress, and that there are certain limits when we get beyond these limits that we put the future of survivability on Earth in peril. So they've also assessed for these 9 categories, where are we at this point in time in terms of how far from the limits, the safe limits, are we? And here's what they've determined. So for climate change, they've assessed that we are in the danger zone. For biodiversity loss, we are far into the danger zone. Deforestation, also in the danger zone. Freshwater use is getting there, but we're still in the safe operating zone. Pollutants are pretty far into the red, and both organic and man-made pollutants. Now, what's interesting is to see what are the main human activities that are causing these 9 different problems. So if we were to look at that, we know from what we hear in the media that climate change is primarily caused by the burning of fossil fuels. But as I'll explain later, human agriculture has a major influence on climate change as well. If we look at biodiversity loss, the main reason for biodiversity loss is loss of habitat. And that is the primary contributor is our agricultural systems. If we look at deforestation, it turns out food and agriculture is also a primary culprit. Water use, it's food and agriculture. Organic pollutants, it's food and agriculture. So when we look at the majority of the serious problems we face on Earth, they're almost all related to food and agriculture. Fossil fuels is definitely a problem, but the food and agriculture gets far too little attention. And that is something that we really need to put more of our time and effort into understanding. Sometimes the media does get it right, and they do talk about this. This is a quote from National Geographic, that our need for food poses one of the biggest dangers to the planet. So when it comes to things that we can do as individuals and as communities to really improve the future of the Earth, avoiding meat and dairy turns out to be it's argued to be at least one of the single biggest ways to reduce your impact on the Earth. And when I first learned about this about 10 years ago, it came as a big surprise to me because you don't hear much about this. And our daily, our way of life relies on things like meat, milk, and eggs for many of us. Many different countries and cultures, that is seen as a necessity, almost like water and air. And we are never told growing up that these products are catastrophic for the environment. We're never given that information growing up, but it's really taught to us that these are normal and necessary kind of elements of our culture and our society. What we need to do is really understand what are the environmental implications of the food that we grow and that we eat. And so I'm going to attempt to explain in detail what these connections are in my talk. So the first point I want to make is that everyone on Earth has to eat. So obviously that's something we all know, but we don't often appreciate the magnitude of what that means. So we have 7.6 billion humans to feed on Earth, and that number is growing every day. And each person on Earth requires 3 meals a day. So if you think about this, it's 23 billion meals that we have to produce every single day. It's hard to think of any other human activity where we have to produce 23 billion of anything every day. All other industries are, we produce millions of different objects and gadgets per year. but there's nothing really we produce on the scale that we have to produce food. So if you just think of that in terms of the natural resources and the impact on Earth, you realize it puts enormous demands on the Earth and our natural resources. Another thing to think about is that as long as the human population is here, we can never phase out food. This demand will continue and exist as long as we're, human civilizations are around. And with our numbers growing, we really have to grow and consume food as efficiently as possible. I want to talk a little about the carbon cycle. So if you're familiar with the cause of climate change, the main cause is the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And as there's more carbon in the atmosphere, the climate gets warmer because carbon has a heat trapping effect. Now, what I like about this diagram is it shows that there are certain forces that put carbon into the air, and there are certain forces that take carbon out of the air. But in fact, there's only two things that really take carbon out of the air. Those are the red arrows here. The first one is the oceans. So the oceans do absorb carbon dioxide, but that's a double-edged sword because in the process, they become more acidic and more hostile to life. So that is not necessarily a good thing, but they do play a role. The other factor that takes carbon out of the air is plants, vegetation, trees, forests. These are things that we need to keep the carbon at a safe level on Earth. And we need more forests. This is probably our biggest chance to stop climate change, is to regrow vast areas of forest on the planet. The main thing that is preventing that is our agricultural systems right now. So when you look at this picture, if I ask, what do you see here? Most people would say forest. But what we have to really realize is this is, I apologize, the slide's not working. It should say this is carbon from the atmosphere that has been trapped in solid form, solid organic carbon. And if you can imagine regrowing forests in millions of acres around the world, how much carbon we can soak up from the atmosphere and store in the roots and the leaves and the trunks of these trees. So I want to go on to another scientific concept, which is food, energy, and trophic levels. So what are trophic levels? This diagram is called a trophic cascade. And this shows basically how food energy travels through a natural ecosystem. So all food energy originates from the sun. And that sunlight is captured by plants, which are called the producers. And they're the ones that are able to take sunlight and convert it into food energy that animals can use. So these plants are consumed by animals, the primary consumers, who are in turn consumed by the secondary consumers and up to the top of the food chain. So you're all familiar with the food chain, I'm sure. Now, one thing that's less known is, why is this diagram shaped like a triangle? Well, the reason is every time you take a step up this ladder, you lose a large amount of energy, of the food energy. And it turns out there's a rule called the 10% law, and you lose 90% of the food energy every time you take a step up this ladder. And the reason is pretty basic. It's because animals use most of the food, the energy from the food they consume for their daily metabolism, metabolic activities. So only about 10% of what an animal eats, including ourselves, is captured into their flesh and available to the next animal that eats them. So as you climb up the ladder, there are fewer and fewer organisms that can be supported at each level. And that's why this is shaped like a triangle. So keeping this in mind, I want to just do a thought experiment with you. Let's imagine we have a planet where all humans are herbivores and we grow crops and we eat those crops directly. So if you were to draw this trophic kind of diagram for that scenario, it would look like this. You have the crops that we grow, and at the next level you have the humans. Now let's say these humans decided to be carnivores. What would happen to this trophic diagram? So if you think about it, we have the same number of humans, but those humans are now eating animals. Those animals have to get their calories from somewhere, so they get them from plants. So what does this do to the natural resource usage? Basically, because of the 90% loss at each level, we need 10 times more farmland, 10 times more water, 10 times more fertilizer. We also generate 10 times more manure, and we have billions of extra mouths that we have to feed. And this is the situation we have ourselves in today, where most people do eat a large amount of animal protein. And what you can even see is that this diagram implies there will be more farm animals on Earth than humans. And that is indeed the case that we have today. So the 90% rule is kind of a rule of thumb. We actually have some more realistic numbers that we get from studies of farm animal metabolism. So we know that we grow mostly corn and soy to feed most of the world's farm animals. We feed about 25 units of plant protein in the form of corn, soy, and other plants to a cow, and we recover 1 unit of edible protein for humans. So 96% of the protein and calories are lost in that process. For pigs, slightly more efficient, or less inefficient, I should say, we feed them about 10 units of plant protein, and we get 1 unit of edible human protein for humans. And chickens, it is about 4.5 units protein going in to get 1 unit of protein out. So you can see it's a large loss of calories and energy and protein when we feed plants to animals to try to make food for humans. It's just inherently an extremely inefficient process. Here's another way to think of this. So if you take an all-American meal, I'm going to say a quarter pounder. And this is something obviously millions of people go and eat every day. In terms of the resource usage it took to make this, this is equivalent to making 25 meals with equivalent protein and calories that are plant-based meals, and simply throwing 24 of the meals in the garbage. And now you multiply this by the number of people who are eating this every day, and you can start to imagine how wasteful this is in terms of land and water and energy. Now let's look around the world and see really which countries are consuming the most meat and animal products. And you see the US is near the top. We're at about 200 pounds per person per year of meat consumption. The kind of the more developed areas of the world are also very high. So Europe, South America, Australia, they're also in the 150 to 200 pounds per person per year. What we see in India, China, and some of the developing regions, it's much, much less. But as these populations grow more wealthy and middle class, there is a growing hunger for more animal products. And so what we see in those parts of the world, the more developing parts of the world, their consumption year over year is going up and up and up of animal products. And it is going to lead to major, major problems, ecological problems, because it's an unsustainable trend. What we do see is that with us being some of the biggest consumers of animal protein, we have a lot of power actually to do a lot of good by changing. And by doing that, we also set a new cultural norm that other countries will hopefully follow our example. But it starts at the individual level with each of us choosing to consume less. Here's the study from 2017, and it shows the amount of land that it takes to grow 100 grams of protein for different types of food. And you can see there's a clear dividing line that everything below this line, this is how much land it takes to grow 100 grams of protein for wheat, potatoes, rice, and other plant-based foods. And above this, it's 100 grams of protein for animal-based foods. And you can see when you get to organic beef, it gets as bad as 150 square meters to grow 100 grams of protein compared to, for soybeans, 1 square meter. So we're talking, 100, 150 times more land to grow the same amount of nutrition. It is just a stark difference between the animal and the food, the animal products and the plant-based products. And even if you look at the low end at eggs, we're talking, 3.8 meters. Wheat is up there, but it's still 2 to 3 times greater than kind of the average plant-based product here. When you look at greenhouse gas emissions per 100 grams of protein, you see the same trend. The plant-based products are significantly lower in greenhouse gas emissions than the animal-based products. I want to ask you to imagine what the Earth might have looked like 1,000 years ago if you were to look at different regions of the Earth. And what I think you would see, you'd see vast forest cover. You'd see thriving biodiversity. You'd see rivers and jungles and rainforests and, beautiful natural ecosystems as far as the eye could see, because the human population was just not that high 1,000 years ago. But if you look at the Earth today, or what much of it looks like this. And you've probably, I'm sure you've seen this if you've taken an airplane flight across the US. There are vast areas, particularly in the Midwest, but also Central California, that are partitioned into this quilt-like geometric pattern. And these are, of course, farmlands and pastures. But what we don't really appreciate on a daily basis is how much of the Earth actually looks like this. So I was able to make a video in Google Earth, which I encourage you to all take a look at Google Earth and look at what the actual aerial view of the United States looks like. But I'm going to show you a little piece of it here. So I'm going to zoom into Indiana and Ohio. Can everybody see the video? Yes. So you can see how it's almost, wall to wall cut up into these perfect geometric shapes. So let's move a little bit to the west here. So almost anywhere you look in the Midwest, it is cut up into these perfect shapes. And of course, this is not what nature was meant to look like, and certainly not what nature looked like 1,000 years ago. I'm going to zoom into the area around the Mississippi River. And you'll see the Mississippi River is surrounded on all sides by farmland. And then lastly, we'll go to the state of Iowa, and you can see the state of Iowa is basically one giant farm. So we don't often realize the magnitude to which mankind has really changed the terrain of the earth, but we have transformed it from forests and jungles and wetlands and natural ecosystems into farmland. Now, if you look at what is all this, why do we need so much farmland? The vast majority of it is for feeding animals. In fact, a huge portion of it is for cow pasture and range, but then we also have sheep and goats and horse land for feeding horses, and they grow a lot of this. They grow hay or forage for animals. But then we have the livestock feed, which is soy and corn mostly, and then feed exports. Now compare this to the relatively small area where we grow all our fruits and vegetables and other plant-based products, which is really provides most of our calories, and our nutrition comes from a very small area compared to 41% of the US landmass, which is used for feeding farm animals. What if we look at a worldwide scale? So if we look on the world scale, the same analysis was done, and it turns out the area that we use, that humanity uses to grow food to feed our livestock is equivalent to North and South America combined. So about 27%, actually I've seen numbers as high as 40% of the world's habitable landmass is used to grow food to feed farm animals. And compare that to this purple area, which is roughly the size of China and Southeast Asia. And that's where we grow all of our grains and our fruits and vegetables and legumes and other plant-based products. So you can see it's relatively small compared to the land used to feed livestock. But what's really striking is the difference in nutrition we get from the two lands. So from that huge red area that's used to feed livestock, it only provides 18% of humanity's calories and 37% of humanity's protein. Whereas we get the majority of our calories and protein from the small area that was equivalent to China and Southeast Asia. It's only 23% of our agricultural land provides 80% of our calories and 63% of our protein. So it's just another way to show how inefficient it is in terms of land to funnel crops through animals to make food for humans. And yet another study shows that if we were able to give up meat and dairy worldwide, we would be able to recover land equivalent to the size of the US, China, the European Union, and Australia. All of that land could be reclaimed and returned to natural conditions. And we still have enough land to feed everybody on Earth. So with that, I'd like to stop and take the first question and answer break if anybody has any questions.
This is pretty overwhelming for me, and I imagine for many people. Where do you see educationally or politically this kind of information getting out, Mohan? I know you're right here, and there's a group of us, not a large group, but this is such powerful information. Is COP at any of the major environmental, like COP26 or COP27, is there anything devoted there to educating people on this or lobbying for change?
There's surprisingly little, and I have been watching the climate conferences year after year, and they almost never talk about food and agriculture. It is, at best, it's a footnote. And the need to reduce animal product consumption globally is almost a taboo thing to talk about. In fact, they still serve, until a couple of years ago, they were serving, very animal product heavy menus at these climate conferences. So it is sort of the elephant in the room that nobody's paying attention to. Politically, the meat and dairy industries are incredibly powerful. So they have, armies of scientists who are producing information that is meant to confuse and mislead the public. And so there's a lot of misinformation out there. But yeah, it really needs to get more attention at the political and the, activist kind of levels. But my goal is really to get the information out there to the public and get people talking about this more, because it is an urgent problem that does not get enough attention. And it requires all of us to really think about changing if we want to make a difference.
We have another comment here that maybe you would respond to from Barbara Chornick. She says, it's always a shock to me to see meat served at conservation zoos and other ecologically minded places.
I agree completely. In fact, I used to go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and they would serve fish in the cafeteria at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and that always, perplexed and bothered me. And there's just a hypocrisy there that people either they tolerate or they just don't notice it. But it's there in many settings. for instance, you go to like national state parks and they serve beef, which is one of the, leading causes of biodiversity loss. But not just people haven't made the connections yet, I guess.
Well, Carol Miller says it's hard for man to give up meat. It's as hard as it is to give up plastics. I am vegan for the animals. So she certainly has done that. But why is it so hard for us? Why do you think it's hard?
I think there's a lot of reasons. There's cultural reasons, there's biological reasons. If you look at our anatomy, we have anatomy that's very similar to gorillas and chimpanzees, who are largely vegetarian. Gorillas are 100% vegetarian. They only eat plants. Most of us, I think almost all of us, could not survive on a diet of raw meat. We are not designed for that, right? It's cooking as a technology that brought meat into our diet, fire and cooking. And so it's really a technological introduction, but I think we are addicted to it the same way we're addicted to sugar, because it is a very heavy source of calories, very dense source of calories. And we still have kind of the primitive desire to consume a lot of calorie dense foods. So that's my thinking. But I do think it is a form of addiction that is just unrecognized.
Thank you. That's all that the comments or questions that have come in to date, Mohan.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Can everybody still hear me? And is everything I'm saying clear? So far, so good. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I want to share some numbers with you, but I also want to get you thinking about what these numbers are and see if you know what they might be. So it's not something you think about often, but does anybody have any idea how many animals worldwide are slaughtered for food? And we're just talking land animals now. So it's mainly cows, pigs, and chickens, but also, sheep, goats, and lots of other species, but these are the main ones. So if you have any ideas, feel free to put them in the chat. And even if you want to just give an order of magnitude, are we talking thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions? So I see 1 billion. Trillion animals per year. Okay, so the latest numbers we have are roughly 77 billion land animals per year are killed for human consumption. So an absolutely mind-boggling number, 10 times the human population. And so you can imagine the resources that go into raising these animals and the amount of waste that they produce, and the amount of crops and fertilizer that it takes to raise all of these animals is just massive. But we haven't talked about ocean life or marine life in general. Any ideas whether that's more or less than the land animals? So the number is over 1 trillion. It's estimated to be 1 to 3 trillion. And at the rate we are taking seafood out of the ocean, we are taking it far faster than the marine life can reproduce. So at this current rate, we're basically headed towards empty oceans in the next 30 years. So someone in the chat mentioned that they don't see a problem. My opinion is sustainable seafood is a myth. You see a lot of marketing about sustainably caught, but I don't see how anything can be sustainably caught when we are catching fish faster than they can reproduce. So to me, that is it's a marketing tactic that unfortunately many people are buying into that. There's also fish farming, which is also billed as sustainable, but the industry doesn't tell you is you have to feed the fish on the fish farm something. So you either feed them crops, or a lot of the fish on fish farms are fed fish waste from the ocean. So they actually catch fish from the ocean to feed fish on fish farms. And it takes 5 pounds of ocean caught fish to raise 1 pound of farmed fish. So again, fish farming is not a solution. It's also contributing to the decline of the oceans. So neither of these trends is really unsustainable. What is really concerning is, as I mentioned before, in the developing world, livestock consumption is increasing, and by 2050, it's predicted to double. And that is a trend that is just simply not sustainable with the land that we have on Earth right now. So some more trivia on numbers. Does anyone have any idea how many humans are born every second of every day? So I'll give you the numbers. The number is about 4.5 humans are born every second around the globe, and about 1.8 humans die every second around the globe. So we do have a growing population, of course, because we're being born faster or greater than the number that are dying every second. Farm animals are 2,500 farm animals are born every second, and 2,500 are slaughtered every second. And this is not including fish. So again, if you think of the resources that go into raising farm animals versus the resources that humans use, you can see it's far greater.
Oh my God.
These are, shocking numbers that people don't often think about. And if you look at the biomass of the land mammals on Earth, so what does this mean? This means if I took all the mammals that are on Earth today and I put them on a scale and I sorted them into categories, you would see 36% of that weight is humans, who are mammals, of course. 60% of the weight is livestock. So these are cows and pigs and goats and sheep. So we're not even including chickens here. And all the wild mammals that still exist are 4% of the biomass of mammals on Earth. So clearly, again, you can see it's the livestock that is squeezing the biodiversity into nothing right now. If we were able to get rid of this massive livestock population, nature would flourish. The wild animals, biodiversity would reclaim the planet. So we would see vast areas of the planet transformed back to their natural condition. So there are many different individual reasons why animal farming can be arguably called the most destructive industry on Earth. And I'm going to go through some of the specific issues that it caused, that animal farming is responsible for. So the first one, of course, is climate change. So how does animal farming actually cause climate change? Well, there are 5 different ways. The first is that it's responsible for an enormous amount of deforestation. So to grow all these crops, these feed crops, and to make pastures for animals, the primary way of getting that land is cutting down forests and natural ecosystems. So when we do that, we release a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. The second is that certain animals, particularly cows, emit methane, and that's part of their digestive process. And methane is a climate warming gas, a very powerful climate warming gas. And we have 1.2 billion cows on Earth right now. So that when you add that all up, it makes a big impact. It turns out when manure decomposes, it also emits methane and nitrous oxide, which are very powerful climate warming gases. And fertilizer, a vast amount which is used to grow food for animals, also emits nitrous oxide. And finally, there's a lot of energy that just goes into the process of raising, transporting, and slaughtering animals. And that usually comes from fossil fuel sources. The reason we mention methane and nitrous oxide is because they are significantly more powerful than carbon dioxide in their warming potential. So methane is 86 times more powerful, and nitrous oxide is almost 300 times more powerful. So they're very, very potent climate warming gases. How does animal agriculture's greenhouse gas compare to, for instance, fossil fuels? Well, it's often said that animal agriculture is responsible for at least 14.5% of greenhouse gas emissions. So that is roughly equivalent to the emissions of all vehicles on Earth. So all the planes, trains, ships, boats, automobiles, roughly that is equivalent to the amount of gas or greenhouse gas impacts that comes from raising animals. However, it's most likely this is an underestimate because this number doesn't consider some important factors. One of the most important factors is the rewilding effect. So if we were able to, significantly reduce meat and dairy consumption, as I'd mentioned before, a lot of land would revert to natural ecosystems. And this effect would soak up a lot of carbon from the atmosphere. And that effect is not captured in the 14.5% number. So if you do factor that in mathematically, you could say that animal agriculture's impact to climate change is at least 28%. So if fossil fuels are the leading cause, animal agriculture is certainly the second most important cause of climate change. What is clear is that to keep climate change from exceeding 2 degrees centigrade, there are major changes in lifestyle that are required. So this is from a study from 2018, and it shows the magnitude of the individual change that is needed to keep climate change under 2 degrees. So we're talking significantly lower amounts of beef, pork, milk, and eggs. So around the world, deforestation is a major problem, and the expansion of agricultural land to feed animals is the leading cause. Similarly, when you tear down rainforests and natural habitats, you cause mass extinction. So the leading cause of mass extinction, again, is animal agriculture. Water usage. So I'm going to ask you, what do you commonly hear from authorities on the drought? What should we do to help with the drought? Most people will say take shorter showers, right? Or don't irrigate your lawn or things like that. Well, if you look at, I'm just going to show California's water footprint, but this is representative of the entire country's water footprint. Personal water use, this is residential use for your baths, your showers, your watering your lawn. All of the home use is only 4% of California's water footprint. Meat and dairy consume 47% of California's fresh water, but you never hear anybody say, don't drink milk, don't eat hamburgers when it comes to water. It's always about take shorter showers. So other agriculture and industrial products are 46 and 3%. But really, the huge amount of water use for the least gain goes into the production of meat and dairy products. So if you were to compare showers now to a hamburger is worth about 1 month of shower water. So my point of view is take as many showers as you want, but if you can give up a hamburger, you save a month of shower water. Now, a gallon of milk is worth about 1,000 gallons of water or 2 months of shower water. Another major issue caused by all the animal farming is manure. So we have vast amounts of manure created by farm animals. It's actually about 130 times the volume of manure or feces and urine created by the human population. And what's really scary is that, when you and I flush our toilets, we have a very sophisticated sewer system and waste treatment that's required for all human waste. But farm animal waste has no requirements about disposal or treatment or disinfection or any of that. It's basically stored in huge lagoons that are periodically sprayed onto fields. And what happens to all of the nutrients in this is it runs into our rivers, into our groundwater, into our oceans, and it causes things like toxic algae blooms, E. coli contamination, food poisoning. All of these are caused by the massive amount of animal waste that we generate. A lot of that animal waste and also fertilizer residue makes its way to the oceans. And so we have areas of the ocean that are called dead zones. And in these dead zones, basically there is no oxygen left because the nutrient pollution from farms has caused algae to bloom and consume all the oxygen in the water. So there's a big one here in the Gulf of Gulf of Mexico, where the Mississippi River drains into the Gulf of Mexico. There is a huge area that is a dead zone where there's no more aquatic life left. Another major issue is antibiotic overuse. So when you or I get sick, we go to the doctor, we get antibiotics, we're told to take them for a certain amount of time and not take excessive amounts and not take them for longer than necessary. But actually 80% of the antibiotics in the US are not for humans. They're given to farm animals. And they're not only given to farm animals when they're sick, they're given in continuous low doses because farmers have found that this makes the animals grow faster and they get fat, they get to slaughter weight faster. So most farm animals are given small amounts of antibiotics continuously. And what is the consequence of this? Well, the major consequence is the development of antibiotic-resistant superbugs. So with this irresponsible use of antibiotics is causing a major rise in the prevalence of antibiotic-resistant superbugs, which is going to be a major problem for all of us. A related risk is the pandemic risk. So here's a quote from a Dr. Michael Greger: if you actually want to create global pandemics, build bigger factory farms. And you can imagine this is a petri dish of disease. Basically, when you have animals in this proximity living in their own waste, this is a breeding ground for new diseases. And it's born in history that we know that majority of pandemics globally have originated in animal diseases that have jumped across to humans. And so you can see from the 1800s through now, majority of pandemics, 3 out of 4 pandemics have originated in animals, and many times in farmed animals. And just to show you this is actually happening all the time, I'm going to show you some headlines from the last couple of years. So this is actually not even the last couple of years, this is a few months ago, in April 2022. It's ongoing right now. There's a huge avian influenza spread in the US, and we're up to about 40 million birds that have been killed to prevent this avian influenza. Avian influenza has also jumped to humans, so some humans have gotten sick from this. In 2021, there were hundreds of millions of pigs in China that were killed because of the swine fever mutations. And in 2020, there were 17 million mink that were killed because they found that they could spread human coronavirus. So this is happening all the time because of the vast number of animals that are being farmed around the world. We are basically, it's a ticking time bomb for the next pandemic to happen. So let's talk about world hunger. So worldwide, we know world hunger is a problem. There are about 800 million people who live in constant hunger. But somehow we managed to grow enough grain to fatten 70 billion farm animals. So hopefully you can see that the two issues are connected. Imagine we put all the resources, the land, to grow that food, and we fed it to humans instead of the farm animals. In the US, 70% of the grain that we grow is for farm animals. And there are certain places in the world definitely where people have to choose between eating the food they grow or selling it to ranchers who can fatten farm animals for more wealthy consumers to eat. So there are definitely places where the feeding of crops to farm animals is definitely taking food out of people's mouths. We know that if we were to transition widely to plant-based diets, we can feed up to 12 billion people on Earth. And the biggest step we can take to end world hunger is for all of us to eat as much plant-based as possible. We touched a little bit on this, that the oceans are also in deep trouble because of humanity's hunger for fish, and the oceans cannot sustain the rate that we are currently removing marine life. So that is a serious concern as well. So let's take a breath. I know I've given you a lot of bad news there. I want to take a break for a Q&A here. Okay, I'm reading a couple comments. I don't think it's proven that SARS-CoV-2 virus originated in bats. That may be true. I'm not an expert on that. My understanding was that it originated in bats, but I will take another look at that. Thank you for pointing that out. How bad is dairy versus red meat? So that is, it depends. It depends what, I guess, what category of bad that you're talking about. So in terms of water usage, dairy is terrible. In terms of manure generation, dairy is really bad. I would say worse than red meat. But red meat is probably worse in terms of land use and greenhouse gas emissions. And in terms of the health effects, if we want to talk about health, red meat is terrible for health. There is a long comment here about fish farms and sustainable wild seafoods. Okay, yeah, interesting comments. I think what I'm arguing is not for people who are subsistence fishers, people who are small scale fishermen and fisherwomen. That is, there are many places where people don't have any option of what they can eat. And we certainly cannot ask these people to change their diet and go vegan when they have very few options as to what they can eat. I'm mainly talking to people who do have choices, like most of us, where we can go to the supermarket and choose anything that we want, or we can go to a restaurant and there's almost always a vegetarian option. So yeah, I agree that until we lift everybody out of poverty, it doesn't make sense to talk to people who are subsistence farmers and fishers about changing their diets. I hope that addresses that question. So we keep going?
Yes, please.
Okay. How are we doing on time, Marita?
If we could finish by, let's see, it's 8 o'clock right now, a minute to 8. If we could finish by 8:15, is that possible?
I think that's possible, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. So I would like to present for your consideration the idea that we've talked a lot about ecological issues and that the ecological consequences, and I do believe it's a crisis ecologically, but I want to present the case that it's also a moral and spiritual crisis that we need to consider. There are some images in this section I want to give you a warning about. They may be a little bit troubling. So if you're sensitive to that, please feel free to tune out. I believe we start life with a natural compassion and empathy towards other beings, and in particular animals. If you think about your childhood and your children's childhood, animals are our best friends for most children. They are the heroes of our stories. They are often, our pets and our companions, and we see ourselves through the innocence and the purity of the animals that we share this earth in. But slowly, as we grow up, that's slowly kind of, we are bombarded with messages that certain animals don't deserve the same compassion. And it's in advertising, it's also enforced by our culture and by what we learn from the government, what we learn about the food, what we learned, food education also teaches us that certain animals are here to be consumed and that compassion doesn't really apply to them. When we go to the supermarket to buy our, animal products, we also see these images that lead us to believe that these animals are treated with respect and that they have good lives and they don't suffer and that they're not being abused or exploited. But the reality is far different. More than 99% of the farm animals in the US and around the world, it's over 90%, are raised in facilities called CAFOs, Concentrated Animal Feeding Operations. These are also called factory farms. And the goal of a CAFO is very simple. It is a factory to raise animals from birth to slaughter as quickly as possible. And the way to do that is to keep them mobile, to isolate them, to deny them any movement or anything that's natural to them, so you can fatten them as quickly as possible. Here's an example of a modern chicken farm. So there are tens of thousands of facilities like this around the US where chickens are grown from birth to slaughter in about 6 to 7 weeks on a diet of usually soybeans and corn. And these chickens have been bred genetically to grow extremely fast. Here's a comparison of a chicken from 1957 to a chicken to modern chicken at the same age. So basically they grow 4 times as fast. And this is through selective breeding that we've done this. As a result, these chickens, we know they suffer enormously from skeletal problems, from deformities, from all sorts of health problems, because chickens were never meant to grow this fast. But this was profitable for the industry. This allowed people to have bigger breasts, which was seen as desirable. And so all farm animals basically have been selectively bred to be more useful to humans at the expense of their own welfare. Here's an example of a modern pig farm. You can see most of these pigs never get the opportunity to even turn around. The stalls are too small to turn around, but they don't get the opportunity to socialize or be out in the sun or do things that animals arguably should do. Most of the standard practices on these farms, if you or I were to do them to a dog or a cat, we could be imprisoned for felony animal cruelty. But these are all routine. These are all routine and allowed on factory farms. And there are broad legal exemptions that have been gotten by the factory farming industries that allow them to do essentially whatever they want in the name of efficiency and profit. We don't often think about what goes into making a glass of milk, but the reality is the milk industry, the dairy industry is one of the cruelest, because what it involves is separating a calf from its mother, usually at birth. So cows produce milk for the same reason that humans do, and it's only to feed their young. And so the dairy industry relies on continuous impregnation of cows to make more calves, but the calves are a byproduct. Really what they want is the milk. So when a calf is born, it's taken from the mother, and it's often slaughtered within days of birth. And that's so we can collect the milk for humans. You can imagine if another creature were to treat us that way, the amount of pain and suffering that would result in that. Another industry that also has hidden cruelty is the egg industry. So you may think that you don't have to kill a chicken to get the eggs, but there's a huge number of male chicks that are born that are useless in the egg industry. So every day these chicks are disposed of in various ways, the most common being ground alive or suffocated. Really what we're talking about here is the commoditization of living beings. And these animals, we have reduced our farm animals to nothing more than objects on an assembly line, just as if we were making tennis balls or sneakers. And this is something that really is the worst of humanity, in my opinion, that stays hidden behind closed doors and hidden behind clever marketing labels, so people don't realize really what happens behind at these facilities. But it is truly the worst of humanity, in my opinion. How do we justify this? Well, when you talk to people in this industry or people who, want to defend the farming of animals, they often say we're more intelligent, we're more technologically powerful, our desires are more important, and humans are superior. So this boils down to a philosophical concept called might makes right, which is basically we are more powerful, we can do what we want with them. But of course, the same principle has been used to justify many different cruelties over the history of humanity. So if you think about it, really, shouldn't we use our power to show compassion and show mercy rather than exploit and abuse these creatures who are less powerful than us? Lastly, we have to think about the human victims of this industry too. There are about 500,000 slaughterhouse workers in the US, and these are people who come from the most disadvantaged corners of society, many immigrants, illegal, undocumented workers, and they're forced to do really psychologically damaging things day after day. There are about 2 amputations per week in the US in the slaughterhouse industry. And there's tremendous psychological damage that happens to people who are unfortunate enough to work in this industry. So I want to end this section with a quote from Leo Tolstoy, who said, "As long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields." And I interpret this to mean, as long as we treat life with such callous disregard and disrespect, we will continue to do the same with human life. So we'll take one more Q&A and then we can finish the talk after that.
Can you see the comments here from Carolyn Miller?
I am reading them. Yeah. Also consider Premarin. Yes, there are many products, medical products, that also rely on the abuse of animals in some way or the other. Premarin is one of them. Oh, that is true. And there's a huge industry for animal experimentation and research where, millions of animals also suffer in that. So a lot of what I'm arguing here, I would extend to the animal vivisection and the animal research industry as well.
And then Carolyn Staub brings up the reality of the large number of fires here in California, and that there seems to be no end to the fires up north. And we're not watching those changes in the planet, wondering if in 40 to 80 years, we will go on existing. We're snuffing ourselves out.
So, yeah, there are a lot of troubling things happening in the world. I do think there will be a lot of suffering in the next 100 years, but I don't think, personally, I don't feel humanity will be snuffed out. I remain optimistic. I think education can go a long way in teaching people how to live more sustainably and more harmony with nature and the planet. And I'm hopeful still.
And this is a good question also from Carolyn Staub. What can we do to lessen human desire? And I think of that as it resides in me as well as in, all of us watching this and the rest of humanity. How do we make those moral, spiritual, lifestyle changes on behalf of a better world?
It's a great question. I don't have all the answers, but my feeling is education and discussion and dialogue goes a long way. We have to weigh our immediate interests with the interests of our children and our grandchildren, and the long-term interests of the planet. So, it's convenient to go out and eat a hamburger today, but once you're aware of the far-reaching consequences of that, maybe you're less likely to do it. And so I think education is a great place to start. People have to just understand the connections. And then I don't believe you can force anybody to change. You can just give them the information and hope that they do the right thing. And that's my philosophy.
And hopefully religion also, or human values, one doesn't have to be a religious person, but there are human values that you've brought out in your talk that that motivate us. And I think you and I spoke about this the other day, starting as we can to eliminate certain products, whether it's meat or ice cream, my favorite thing. So, and I think community makes a difference too.
Absolutely.
Doing things together. And I see Charlia Mashin, a physician, has something to say here. This is overwhelming for sure, and we each need to take responsibility for our choices. Also, there are many people who are dedicating their lives to changing human minds, like yourself, Mohan, and changing the lives of non-human animals. We can also support those working to transform these travesties.
I agree. Great comment. I think ultimately what we're trying to do is culture change. We're trying to change, our cultural lens that we look at the world. And just like most of us wouldn't ever want, think of eating a dog or a cat, we want to bring other animals into that sphere, that same sphere of compassion. And in fact, when I first went vegetarian and I, would have a craving to eat a chicken nuggets or something like that, I would think of it as a dog or a cat. Would I eat this if it was a dog or a cat? And that slowly, helped me lose that desire to want to eat those kinds of foods. And so that's
a
another
great example. And here's Mary Dadio. Will you be talking about ways for folks to reduce their meat consumption? For some people, it might be easier to reduce than to totally stop eating cold turkey.
Absolutely, yeah. I didn't mean to imply that everybody should go vegan today. I know that's impractical and not possible for people. So the ask really is to gradually move in that direction, and take baby steps to get there. And if you regress or slide back, no judgment, no punishment. Just do your best. Every meal is a new opportunity to eat more plant-based. And when you have the option, choose to eat plant-based, and just do the best you can. That's what I advocate for. It's not black or white. You don't have to be 100% vegan all the time to do actually some good.
And Charlia Mashin is asking, how can our family and friends view your presentation? Do you have a presentation or website where this is, a kind of a ready-made program that people could view?
Sure. There are some, I've given a number of these talks, and some of them are recorded on YouTube. I believe you're recording this one now, so maybe I don't know if you'll make this available.
Yes, I believe we will at the diocese.
Okay.
And you're saying that there are some available on YouTube.
There are some on YouTube, and I'm happy to provide my slides as well, if anybody would like a copy of the slides.
Wonderful. And Mary says here, it will take time but I agree with educating people may slowly change their habits and ways. We have to start sometime, and it will start with baby steps, I believe. Very overwhelming facts. Much appreciated this eye-opening presentation.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate the comments. I think we have a few minutes, so can I go to the end?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I know I've given you a lot of sobering news, so let me end with some good news here. We have one step we can take, which is, relatively simple, that can potentially solve many different problems. We don't have to rely on industry executives or politicians. We don't have to convince, the government to do anything. We don't have to invent a new technology like carbon sucking machines or anything like that. We don't have to spend a lot of money. And we already have a very powerful choice that we make 3 times a day. Each meal is an opportunity to put this in practice. We can solve some of the world's biggest problems with one simple tool, which is the fork. Some more good news. Eating plant-based we know it is good for you. How often do you see studies that say, we should be eating more meat? I would say almost never, unless it's sponsored by the meat industry. But real scientific studies tell us over and over that meat causes a variety of health problems. It is a leading cause of heart disease and some cancers, and it's a leading contributor to diabetes and other chronic diseases. Medical establishments, certain organizations like Kaiser Permanente are advocating plant-based diets for all of their patients now. We know that it reduces heart disease risk by up to 40%. If you actually look at the leading causes of death in the US, these are numbers from 2020. These are the top 10 causes: heart disease, cancer, COVID-19 was big in 2020, of course, accident, stroke, and various other things. Now, if you look at what the research shows about how much a plant-based diet can improve your odds in these conditions, it's 40 to 52% for heart disease, cancer, 30 to 40% reduction. Even COVID-19, just based on the immunity boosting effects that plant-based diets have, you can significantly reduce your exposure to COVID-19, the severe symptoms from COVID-19. So almost all of the top 10 causes of death can significantly be reduced by eating more plants. The idea that we have to eat animal products to get protein is absolutely false. There are many, many examples of world champion athletes who subsist entirely on plant-based diets. So we know protein does not come from animals, even though that's often, we say have a protein in a side dish on a plate, protein meaning meat. Protein ultimately comes from plants. All protein comes from plants. Animals concentrate and condense that protein, but the protein comes from plants. So the best source is to go straight to the source. The idea that we have to drink cow's milk for calcium is also another myth, heavily promoted, unfortunately, by the government and the dairy industry. Calcium is available in so many different plant-based foods. You just have to ask, where do the cows get the calcium from? And it comes from what they eat, the plants. So we can get it from the plants just like the cows can. And you're probably already eating a lot of vegan foods without even knowing it. Pasta with marinara sauce, or peanut butter and jelly sandwich, minestrone soup. There are so many delicious foods that it's not an exotic diet because you're already eating so many vegetable-based foods. And a lot of what you eat that's animal-based, there are vegan versions of it today. You have to be willing to go out there and try them. So what you can do is really very simple. Every time you have a chance, try to eat plant-based or more plant-based. I recognize not everybody can go overnight vegan, and that's not what I'm advocating for. But an idea is you can make a schedule for a couple days a week where you're vegetarian, or one meal a day where you're vegetarian. Or make a schedule that works for you and just give it a try. A really easy one these days is, if you're still buying cow's milk, to switch to a plant-based milk. The environmental impact is way lower. You still get all the calcium. These have as much calcium as cow's milk, in some cases more. And there are delicious varieties out there. You just have to be willing to change your habits and try different products. And there's so many in every supermarket available today. Similarly, there are some great tasting plant-based meats and cheeses. And I encourage you to be adventurous and go out there and try them. And you're not going to like every one, but I guarantee you will find some that you like and will help you substitute and replace your animal products in your normal kitchen diet. When you go out to a restaurant, try the vegetarian option. There's always something like a veggie burger or a tofu dish, or Middle Eastern places are great. They have lots of vegetarian options. So give them a try. Something that you may not normally have done before. Just be adventurous. There are great resources on the internet. I'm happy to share more with you. If you want to get in touch with me, I can give you some recommendations. What's really important is we need to spread the word and we need to change culture. And the way that happens is by teaching each other. And so teach your family and teach your friends, and especially teach your children about this, because this is what's going to change society, is learning from each other. There are also great documentaries on this topic that you can show to your friends and family, and they're also very powerful ways to teach people. Finally, don't forget that fossil fuels aren't the only issue plaguing humanity, that this factory farming, animal farming is also something we need to keep putting a spotlight on and make sure our decision makers and policymakers are aware of this issue, and that they're not single-mindedly focused on fossil fuels. Finally, I want to leave you with a quote from Albert Einstein, who actually became vegetarian at the end of his life. And he realized a lot of these problems late in life. His quote is, "Nothing will benefit human health and increase the chances of survival of life on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet." So with that,
Thank you so much, Mohan.
thank you. Thank you for your attention. I know it was a long talk. I really appreciate everybody's engagement and attention. And I hope you found it worthwhile.
I'm sure we did, all of us. I'm afraid we can't take any more comments or questions. So I want to thank everyone for being here this evening. I know it was a long program, but I think we're all very indebted to Mohan Gurunathan and the wisdom he shared and the motivation he shared. And hopefully we can carry the light of this program out into our families and our communities. Remember, you can identify Mohan's talks on YouTube. You can contact the diocese for our program, and you can contact Mohan directly. So thank you very much, Mohan, and each and all of you that attended. It really made it all the more meaningful to view this together. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.